to elevate myself here. Not that I need it.
Yeah, no, otherwise we can't see you.
All right, everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome, and thank you for coming to our first ever Festival of Journalism here at Cal Poly. My name is Brady Teufel. I'm the chair of the Cal Poly Journalism Department. Can everyone hear me? John, you good? Projecting enough here? It's great to see so many students, staff, faculty members, community members in attendance here, especially given the nature of the topic being discussed today and its impact on everyone that lives in San Luis Obispo. Before I hand the mic over to CalMatters CEO Neil Chase, I want to say a quick thanks to Neil and all the good folks at CalMatters, including Dave and Evelyn who are here. They have all been amazingly valuable partners in the journalism department's efforts to be at the forefront of journalism education and student media success. Not only does CalMatters hire our students both before and after they graduate, we've also now collaborated on initiatives, research, and our first ever event. This is an important one, with a great group of speakers here to share their thoughts on how San Luis Obispo can tackle the issue of housing in one of the most expensive places to live in the country. So I'm going to call it there and hand the mic over to Neil. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. Brady, thank you. So I'm Neil Chase. I'm the CEO at CalMatters. We are a nonprofit news organization covering California issues, based in Sacramento, but we're all over the state. And we are so thrilled to be here for so many reasons. Cal Poly has been an amazing partner to us in, as Brady said, in a number of different ways. We have a brand new initiative where we're collecting all the information about the state legislature and going to make that available to everybody and use artificial intelligence to turn it into story ideas, which are going to turn into amazing stories you're all going to be able to read pretty soon. Thanks to our friends here at the Institute for Advanced Technology and Public Policy. Did I get that right? And as Brady said, we've worked with students from the program, some of whom are here. This is an amazing school of journalism. It's also a very important place to have this kind of conversation. And we are covering housing issues statewide. This is one of the few issues that you really can go anywhere in California and have a serious, difficult conversation about. There are things that are regional, there are things that are important to different people. You will not find a place in California where housing is not important and on top of everybody's minds, and a really tough problem to solve. So I'm very happy to be able to do this entire event with the journalism program. I want to turn it over to Jeannie to get started and lead us in the panel, and thank you all for coming.
Great timing. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Jeannie Kwong. I am a reporter for CalMatters. I currently cover issues of housing and homelessness, small topic here in California. And before that, I covered poverty, inequality, labor, the social safety net, which all of those things, as we know, are related. So I wanted to do a quick show of hands. How many of you in the audience are Cal Poly students? Okay, a lot of you, very jealous. It's a beautiful place to go to school. And then how many of you all are SLO City renters? Okay, and how many are SLO City homeowners or other residents? Okay, cool. Just wanted to kind of take the temperature of the room. So we're here to talk about housing in a college town. We've seen a lot of sort of loud clashes in other areas, particularly in the UC Berkeley case, which maybe some of you all have heard about, where local neighborhoods end up, or even the city itself ends up really pushing back on housing developments that the university proposes to house their growing student population. We also just across California, including in some of these towns that have prized public universities, there's a housing crisis. The rent is really high. This kind of squeezes the local economy. It just obviously has huge implications for everybody who lives there. So I wanted to kind of explore a little some of the solutions that are being proposed or worked on here in SLO, and talk about how we can avoid that here. We have with us Scott Collins, Executive Director of the Housing Authority of San Luis Obispo, Andy Pease, an architect and city council member for San Luis Obispo City, and Keith Humphrey, Vice President of Student Affairs. Did I get that right? Great. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming, and thank you, Cal Poly, for having us. So I wanted to do a little bit of stage setting. I was looking at some census numbers last night, as one does in their spare time. And the latest census report on rent burden shows that the average renter household in San Luis Obispo County pays more than 30% of their rent, 30% of their income on rent costs. That qualifies those households for this like fancy expert term called rent burden. It's really advised by experts for people not to spend more than 30% of their income on rent because you need it for other things like living, spending time with your kids, saving for your future, other things that just become more and more out of reach. So I was hoping that Scott could do some stage setting for us and talk to us a little bit about why is the rent so damn high?
All right, so that's an easy question, right? Hi everyone, thank you for having us up here, and thanks to CalMatters for the amazing work you all do. I was a city manager for Morro Bay for 5.5 years until recently, and every morning that was the first thing I looked at. So great work you're all doing. Housing is very complicated. At the Housing Authority, or HOUSLO, we focus in on low-income residents, where there's a burgeoning need for housing for those folks, but there's a burgeoning need for housing for everyone. So we all play in that same pool. We may have different reasons why we develop, or for different types of folks that we develop for, but we need a massive amount of more units across every part of this state, especially in the Central Coast region where rents are astronomical and continue to grow. This makes it hard for people to have stable lives, to to grow family, which creates economic pressures, which creates long-term issues for retirements and being able to pay for Social Security, all those things. Healthcare, you can't get enough doctors and nurses to work here, can't get enough mental health workers to work here to help with our clients and to help with everybody else who's been struggling with COVID-19 and the after effects. It affects every aspect of our lives, and we need a lot more housing than what we have. So how did we get here? It's the American dream. Everybody wanted a single family home. Well, that's what we got here, right? We have a lot of single family homes. I figured 90% of the homes in our region are single family homes. Not everybody can afford $1 million home. Most people can't. So this has been a problem that's been slow growing, like climate change, and we've just ignored it because decisions have been pressed down to the local level. City councils are elected after serving on planning commissions because they said no to development. They got elected to be council members so they can continue to say no to development. Okay, this is how we got here, with zoning regulations and the weaponization of our environmental laws to ensure that nothing that looks out of the ordinary gets developed near where I live. So this is how we got here, folks, and it's really challenging to unwind all of that. I don't want to be pejorative. I live in a single family home, so I understand, okay? That's not how I came up in life, but that's where I've landed, and I've been very privileged. But we need a far greater mix of types of housing to be able to allow people to rent and also find starter homes, because we have this broken housing continuum. We need to be able to have shelters for those that are homeless, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, and then you need ladders all the way up to single family homes. We have a broken ladder. So zoning and permitting are the biggest culprits in this. And again, coming from a good place, and the After World War II, that was the American dream that was sold. It was the best marketing campaign ever, aside from Top Gun, I think. And you know, so that's what we all wanted, and it's aspirational, and it's, you know, it's fantastic, but there's repercussions to that. Thankfully, we have great partners at the state level who are working hard to undo some of that, and clashing with local governments. Again, I worked as a city manager, so I understand firsthand how you want to create that balance, but we have a lot more regulations coming that allows by right development of all types, so that's going to help. But we're now faced with disruptions in the market, Airbnbs, for instance, or COVID-19 work from anywhere. People leaving very expensive environments to less expensive places and creating the same problem where they moved to, and on and on. This is not just a California issue, this is nationwide. So that's how we got here, and we have great partners at the city that we're working with to help develop, again, low-income housing, and they're doing a fantastic job. I know Andy will speak to that. But that's a basic primer of how we got here, and a lot of work to undo that.
Yeah, I mean, if you really, really, really want to simplify it, it's basically a complicated supply and demand issue, right? We've grown as a population, we haven't built the number of units to accommodate that population. Now, to add to that, the student population, I'm gonna read another nerdy little tidbit from the city's housing element, which is a document that the city has to get approved every few years by the state, planning for the amount of housing that they need to accommodate the population. It says, San Luis Obispo's housing market is strongly influenced by Cal Poly University and Cuesta College enrollment. Owner-occupied housing units saw a 1% decrease since 2010, even with the large increase of on-campus student housing at Cal Poly. Students often live together in a house and share rental costs. Consequently, college students will outcompete non-student households for rental housing in areas that were historically single-family residential neighborhoods. So one of the ways to alleviate that kind of pressure that college students might bring to the greater local rental market is, of course, to add more on-campus housing, which, Keith, you've all committed to doing here. Cal Poly, I think, actually is among the higher of the CSUs in housing the percentage of students on campus. It's 36%, I believe.
39.
Okay.
And we are the highest.
Well, last I checked, you were second, so congratulations. Tell me how you've moved on up in that ranking.
Well, I think we share the same goals for this greater community that folks in the Housing Authority, our partners in the city, share. And so Cal Poly has long been committed to housing its enrollment growth. And we've done so consistently for the past several decades, in making sure that the number of beds that we add to campus proper outpace the number of new students that we're adding. We've added almost 3,500 apartment beds about 10, 15 years ago. Most recently added about 1,500 beds for new first-year students. That was in 2018. That was actually the first year that we saw for rent signs up around the San Luis Obispo city area proper around campus at the start of school, and from many of the folks that we know who are landlords had to decrease their rents. So I got a D in economics in college, but that's a supply and demand thing, I think, going on there as well, right? So we know that when we can create more supply in the community by building more on-campus housing, it serves the greater needs of San Luis Obispo. We're further committed to that. We're breaking ground this summer on the first phase of no less than 3,000 more beds on campus to be completed in the next 6 years. I think Cal Poly has really been one of the major, if not the biggest, housing developer in San Luis Obispo County over the past 2.5 decades.
And every time you're opening up new beds on campus, are we talking these things get occupied immediately? Are they always filled? What's the levels of that right now?
We are always filled at Cal Poly. Some of that we do by policy. We require first-year students to live on campus. We are phasing in a second-year live-on requirement policy. We can't fully phase that in because we don't have enough capacity yet. These projects will allow us to do that. We have extensive interest lists So students are telling us they want to live with us on campus for many, many reasons. I was on a plane last night coming into San Luis Obispo, and I was sitting next to a dad, as you happen to be, and what do you do? And I told him, and he said, are you in charge of housing? And I said, I am. And he said, my daughter just graduated last year, and I have a junior, and if I can give you one piece of advice, he said, please build more housing. I want my kids to live on campus for 4 years. Completely unsolicited, but really well timed for today's conversation.
And I believe that the university is also committed to housing almost double that proportion, or I guess if you're already at 39%. Anyway,
yeah,
2/3 of the student population housed on campus by 2035.
Yeah,
right?
our long-term goal in the university's long-term plan is about 65% of our enrollment. So we want to house all of our first and second year students and have capacity for even more, because the demand from our students is greater than just first and second year students.
That is a huge increase. How are you paying for that?
Well, you know, that is the most important question, because housing is a financially self-sustaining organization. So the construction costs are paid back by rents from our students. So we work really hard to make sure that we are one of the most efficient housing operations in the state of California. We think we have about 25% less staff on average than most other university housing departments, so that reduces the long-term burden. And we work with, in this new project, for example, we're working with a design build partner who is challenged by us to deliver a minimum of 3,000 beds, but hopefully more, that they can find through construction innovations and affordability. Second, to find construction techniques that reduce the cost of overall construction, and that will have impact on the rents, and for more timely delivery than even the 6-year phases that we have planned. We also do that by being the only CSU campus that actually takes a significant portion of our rent and recycles that money into need-based financial aid for students to live on campus, directly reducing their rents. Currently, we set aside $3.6 million for that this year, and our commitment is to add at least $500,000, if not more, to that amount every year.
And how many students does that translate to?
I don't have the exact number for you, Jeannie, but it tends to impact students who have an estimated family contribution from the financial aid perspective of $7,000 or less. So that's a sizable portion of our student body.
Yeah, I just learned about this program the other day. It's really interesting. Also, I forgot to mention a programming note. There are slips of paper over there for you all to write questions down on, and then I think somebody will pass them up to me at the end, so we will be doing Q&A at the end. Please submit questions. Mine are boring. And then on the issue of developing more student housing, as I mentioned this UC Berkeley case earlier, we have seen just kind of a lot of neighborhood resistance. I mean, there is always neighborhood resistance around lots of different kinds of development projects. But with students specifically, there's been these loud clashes that have gone up to the California Supreme Court, and the legislature is dealing with it now, where there's noise, and does noise from students count as an environmental impact on the surrounding neighborhood? And this is something that's a very current fight at the statewide level. Andy, Keith, are you all watching these cases? Do you all look at those developments and I know the school is not technically on city land, but there are city neighborhoods that surround it with city residents. How do you react to those kinds of developments and try to lessen that kind of thing happening here?
It's a great question. We talk about a healthy tension of a campus and the broader community, for sure. And I would say, to Scott's point in the beginning, in terms of just we lack inventory. And so as a city, I think that we were good at developing kind of businesses and a great community without keeping up with our own housing. So we get that responsibility for our own and mostly for our workforce. It's really, it's a detriment to all of us to not be able to have our workforce be able to afford to be in the city. So for sure that's a focus for us to be able to get kind of workforce housing. And recognizing that students have been a part of our residents for decades. Since the 70s, I think we've probably had 10,000 students living in the city. It's kind of gone up over the years, and there was kind of, sometimes if the enrollment got ahead of the housing, then it was pretty impactful for our workforce to compete for that. But you know, Cal Poly's been awesome about trying to keep that level, and so for them, you know, Cal Poly is self-permitting, right? We have, you know, really no actual jurisdiction over what they build, but it's been a great partnership, and we very collaborative in that way. So I think that the projects that they're developing are super helpful. And then within the city, we don't particularly have housing like this is student housing zoned or anything like that. So we want and love having residents in the city that are students. I think they bring a ton of vitality. So happy to keep that up. But as Cal Poly grows, I think the competition with our workforce is real. So having a lot on campus is super helpful.
I mean, in terms of just planning for growth, I mean, it sounds like both the city and the university separately are trying to plan for each, you know, your own growth. Is there, like, talk to me about the conversation between the two of you. What does that planning look like? I mean, is one of you saying, like, hey, like, you know, if you're going to grow this percent, we're going to take on this percent of the housing, you're going to take on the remainder. You know, how do you work in concert as you look at the projections? How does that work?
Yeah, well, I'll start with a couple comments and turn it over to Keith to fill in on the other side. I think that you know, the state has some requirements for housing, a needs allocation, and so as a county, we are planning where are the best pockets for housing throughout our whole region. So there'll be some on campus for sure, some in the city, but also some in other communities, and then, you know, working towards that jobs housing balance as well. So not all the jobs have to be here in the city of San Luis Obispo. So that's kind of a big picture of trying to have our whole region thrive. And so within that context, there is a certain amount of, hey, what can you build? Well, hey, what can you build? And some of the issues where we might have differences of opinion or ways that we come at it differently are what are the impacts. So, you know, what are the water, how are we, what are the water sources, what do you do with wastewater, what are we doing about transportation, are we, you know, city does the bus service, Cal Poly chips in a bunch for the bus service, but if we want more bus service, where does that money come from, firefighting, police, you know. So I think it's some of the fringe issues that I think are points where we really need to get kind of staff and the user groups in a room and figuring out some of that nitty gritty.
And I think to build on Councilperson Peace's comments, I think we do get our staffs and leadership together regularly. In a small community like this, we are all interdependent on each other, and none of us can take an action without recognizing the impact that it's going to have on another organization in this community. And we have to find ways to do it together and to make sure that we are doing everything we can as partners to reduce those impacts. So when we were doing the long-range plan that was adopted by the CSU Board of Trustees in 2020, there were several years of planning, research, consultation, feedback, discussion, debate, all of those words about the impacts of that plan, what should be in that plan for Cal Poly, how was it going to impact San Luis Obispo and what the city needed to do, and lots of conversations back and forth. So I think that interdependence and how we all have to stay in close communication regularly on big issues and small issues is really important, and I think it's something that we do here in San Luis Obispo and at Cal Poly really well.
And so that's all well and good, but there's always going to be some students who live off campus. You know, right now, most students do. Even when you get to 2/3, there will be many students who live off campus. And I've heard, or seen some reports that the rental conditions aren't great. I understand the city stopped doing rental inspections a few years back. Can you two talk a little bit about, you know, what kind of support you offer for students who are maybe navigating the, you know, private rental market for the first time in their lives?
Sure, I will start and talk about what we do at Cal Poly to support students, and I'll let the council person talk about the rental inspection program.
You better call me Andy.
Okay, I will call you Andy. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm in a very formal space. I will call you Andy, you're welcome. We have an off-campus housing coordinator who works with our students first primarily in an educational capacity. We want to teach our students how to be good neighbors off campus to reduce negative impacts to neighborhood wellness in the city of San Luis Obispo. I think we've been very successful about it. We've received awards from international associations for our collaborative work there. That individual also educates students about their rights as tenants, what to look for in leases, what to avoid in leases, how to approach and problem solve with landlords. And we also have a program that helps students cover that initial deposit because, you know, coming up with first and last month's rent is challenging for anybody at any one given time, let alone our college students. So that's important for them to help get involved. And that person helps advise them on how to navigate the challenging situations when students come to us and say, there's a leak in my roof and my landlord hasn't fixed it for 3 months, or I haven't had hot water for weeks. What are my recourses? How can I get into a better living situation?
And at that point is kind of the city enforcement piece for sure. We did have a brief mandatory rental inspection program, and it was really mixed. I think that it did uncover some real problems in the housing market. And it also created some new problems that maybe it was too aggressive, and it was super unpopular with a lot of folks. And I was one of the folks who was new on council and voted to repeal that mandatory measure in favor of education, empowerment, reporting, and a robust enforcement program, but based on folks knowing what is unacceptable conditions and where to go with that in order to get it addressed.
So it's complaints based.
It is complaints based, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please.
So before coming to Morro Bay, I worked for the city of Santa Cruz and was a UC Santa Cruz student. Go Slugs? Anyone? Nobody. We had a very similar program, a mandatory program, and at the time, similar reaction. And what we found was, again, unintended consequences of policy. We were booting people out of housing, right? Because it was uninhabitable, or what we determined to be, but it was still housing. And so I think going back to what Andy was saying, sort of, okay, how can we find some balance in between? Because we were literally having people have to leave housing. Okay, the housing wasn't great, it was dilapidated, it needed to be helped, but the mandatory aspect, I was actually putting people on the street.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all just comes back to when you have a shortage, you have a lack of choice as a renter, right? And you're willing to put up with a lot more, especially if you're a student or in some other vulnerable situation. And so, you know, I wonder if you all think having more options or developing more housing might also help increase the quality of the private rental market for students.
I think it absolutely will and does. We hear that from our students. When we opened that residential complex in 2018 and there was vacancy for the first time, landlords had to step up their game, had to improve the qualities of their properties. And so, again, I think going back to that supply and demand, to make sure that you are a property in demand, you are going to have to make sure it's up to proper living standards, especially as more options become available in the city.
I think there's also a real, there's kind of a cycle in terms of that investment and landlords, property owners who are remote, and then there's property management, and they don't necessarily have that sense of responsibility. So I think that there are some other levers that we might want to take a look at. I'm not sure what other programs are available, but there's multiple pieces about where it breaks down in terms of maintenance of that rental property. But to the main point, for sure, inventory is our, our best approach to all of this.
One other thing that is not necessarily about students, but obviously related to the university that came up in the city's, planning is, what about housing for faculty and staff? You're one of the largest employer, if not the largest employer in the area. I understand a lot of people have to commute in. Talk to me about who bears the responsibility for housing all of the people who work here?
Well, I don't know that I would use the word responsibility. I think that implies a lot, but I think we are.
I'm not a lawyer, so.
I know, so neither am I, and I have some, and they caution me on words like that. So I'm gonna be cautious on that. About half of our faculty and staff live in the city of San Luis Obispo. The other half live in the surrounding communities. Entry into this housing market for our new employees is equally as challenging for our folks as it is for employees in all of the other industries. So we do feel an obligation, maybe, I don't know if that's a better word.
So I feel like that's even picking up more.
That could pick up more. I know.
Stronger than responsibility.
I know. I have to think this one through, Jeannie, a little bit more. But we do have housing right now for faculty and staff. We've had a community that's been open since 2008. It's full. We are breaking ground on a second complex of 33 more single-family homes at the entrance of campus for faculty and staff. We were going to put apartments on that site as well. The geotechnical issues on that site prevent us from doing that, and so we are looking at other sites that the university has. We have land, which is something that we're very fortunate to have at Cal Poly. So our next housing development for faculty and staff will not be our last. We want to make sure that as many folks that want to live close to or on campus can do so.
And from the city side, and this will overlap with some of the affordable housing, so we have a couple of big projects that are under construction right now, San Luis Ranch and Avila Ranch. And into those two projects in particular, we were able to fold in a couple of things that are helping our workforce. And one of the main ones is that there's a local workers, local first priority. So when a unit is open of these new units, the folks who get first dibs at those are either already work in the city, including this kind of immediate area, or live or work currently. So that's first priority. And those units all have to be owner occupied for the first 3 years. So what that does is it provides opportunities for professionals, workforce, et cetera. And then in addition, we have an inclusionary housing ordinance, so a certain percentage of the units need to be in that deed restricted affordable category. So we work with nonprofit housing developers to be able to do kind of that income qualified. So we're trying to, there's the term about the that missing middle, right? So there's folks who don't make enough, their income is low and they get into this income qualified, which has a whole wait list. I don't want to pretend that there's a bunch of it. And then the development community is making a lot of market rate homes, but they're selling for super expensive. So there's a lot of the staff and teacher, staff on a campus or teachers in our schools or public safety or whatever. There's a whole bunch of folks that are making good money, but it's just still not able to get the housing that we need here.
And can we just, for the audience, define what affordable housing even means? How, who's setting the rents? Are they capped? Who qualifies for that?
So the affordable, you started off, the technical term is, 30% of your income goes to your rents or your housing costs, and the rest goes for the rest of your life. So by law, when we build units and use our vouchers or give vouchers to folks who are income qualified and they go on the market, they will not spend more than 30% of their income on their housing. So if they make $1,000 a month, that means they're spending $300 a month on housing, and we subsidize the rest through the Housing and Urban Development, or HUD for short, Section 8 vouchers. There's a whole nother wing of our work that we do is constructing affordable housing, which is a little bit different. If you don't have a voucher, it's still less than market rate. Oftentimes people are paying less than 30%, but sometimes more, just depending on some of the factors that are hurting our ability to deliver projects, which are construction costs, the fact that we cannot get certain supplies to actually construct our facilities. The trades are harder and harder to come by because people can't live here to work here to build the homes that we need. So all those things, insurance costs, it's really hard to insure anything now. So all those things lead to our doors costing more and more. They used to be about $200,000 a door. Now it's about $500,000 a door to build affordable housing. So we need to go get tax credits. But every single housing authority and nonprofit developer is facing the same challenge. So it's more competitive to go get that money to basically subsidize a portion of the construction, which shows up in lower rents, because we have to be able to pay back the investors who invest in our projects. So the voucher guarantees 30% or less. Anything else is still less than market rate, but not necessarily that target.
So yes, now we're talking about just the actual, cost of constructing housing for everybody else in the rental market. I mean, it sounds like the city has this inclusionary zoning requirement. You're telling developers you have to make some of these units affordable. You're here with your HUD vouchers from the federal government. You've got some of your funding. I mean, is there anything the state can be doing to make this easier? They've been passing bill after bill the past few years saying, build more, we want you to build more, you need to build a certain number of units, you need to make it easier to build, but if it's still so expensive, what else can they do?
They're doing more than any other state in our country right now. It's just the problem has been building for 20 or 30 years, so we're late to the game. But they passed 56 or 60, the governor signed 56 to 60 bills specifically to make it easier to build. And investing more in, outside of tax credits, just putting more general fund dollars into the budget for housing. And there'll be a proposition on the ballot next year that will reallocate funding for mental health to go into housing, because what we're finding is if you get people housed, then you can address substance abuse and mental health. Expecting people to get well on the streets is insanity.
Andy Scott mentioned, the impact of focusing too much on single-family homes that has kind of helped create this crisis. Are we expecting more city neighborhoods that were single-family homes to become developed into apartments to house this population? Where are the areas that we can even build here?
Yeah, yes, I think we are going to see more density necessarily because we love our greenbelt, right? We have this open space that we treasure, and so we have areas outside of the city limits that are really unbuildable for multiple reasons. And so, those developments I've talked about, there's, one or two more that are kind of currently undeveloped, but other than that, we're doing infill. And we're seeing it now, along Foothill, along South Broad Street. We're going to see more down South Higuera. We're going to see more downtown. A lot of people want to live downtown, so if we have kind of a ratty single-story building, maybe that's a great spot for an infill development. So yeah, I think we are going to go up. I think we're trying to capture, build on some of those state laws and also see are there other opportunities. There's a flexible density, so if you build small units, you can build more of them without additional impact fees. And and those kinds of programs. I think one of the main issues that we're going to bump up against, well, we're already bumped up against, is parking. That parking is super expensive. To pay for parking for the residents is just, it's adding a lot of cost for the land holding, and so the dependency on cars in our area is really impactful. I have 2 daughters. One lives and works in Los Angeles, one lives and works in San Francisco, and neither one has a car. And but
2 famously affordable housing markets.
yeah, right. I mean, but it's certainly, you know, it saves them a lot of money by not having to get a parking space. And so I think that San Luis Obispo is kind of struggling with that, because you know, for climate action, for equity, we're trying to move away from a car-centric work and housing and life, you know, work, live, play type of situation. But we don't necessarily have all the other pieces to make it easy. So a lot of, you know, bike lanes, investments in sidewalks and walkability. Our transit is just not there yet. So I think that's also contributing to the cost, and gives us well, it's a conversation as a community. What will developers actually build? What will the market take up?
Yeah, it seems like on the transit and density thing, seems like a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Like, how many people do you need to get in before it becomes like a big city or you know, an active transit hub? Okay, well, thank you for answering my questions. I am going to answer some questions from the audience now. How has the new city rules prohibiting short-term renters truly affected the housing market? Are you seeing former vacation rentals really become long-term units? Great question.
Yes, so San Luis Obispo is super fortunate in that we prohibited vacation rentals a long time ago. So we weren't kind of up against what some of the other beachside communities, I'll be super interested about, you know, the Morro Bay, the other sides of the city experience. So we do allow short-term rentals if a home has an owner occupancy and they want to either rent out a room or rent out the whole house, but only for, you know, no more than half of the year. So you can get some additional income, which is helpful, but it has to be a primary residence. And ADUs cannot be vacation rentals. So 30 days or more, you can do what you want, but anything less than 30 days. And I know some people are like, that's not happening. If you know somebody who's violating that, please report it. There's it's a whole business to do enforcement on those kinds of things. So yes, so I think it's really important to manage the short-term vacation rentals.
This question is, I think, better suited for Keith. With the rental season heavily aligned with the university school schedule, was the decision to transition from a quarter system to semester influenced by this? How will this impact housing, if at all? I imagine we will now have longer leasing agreements.
So I don't think the off-campus rental market process or timeline had anything to do with the university's decision to transition from quarters to semesters. We'll be doing that in fall of 2026, which will create an interesting rental dynamic year. It's going to create an interesting dynamic year across all operations for the university and for the city as our summer is shorter. But we're transitioning to be more in line with the other CSU campuses for an equity-based issue for our transfer students who come from semester systems at the community colleges to help speed their path to graduation. So not related to housing.
Okay. I guess we'll see. How does inflation of raw building materials impact housing development plans for the city and the university? We have some housing development geeks in the audience.
Interest rates are killing us on construction loans. That's across the spectrum. You know, 9% used to be able to essentially get 3%, which that's a 300. I don't know. I'm not great at math. It's a big increase. So that just creates more expensive doors. Let's see what else. The construction materials, same thing, they've plateaued. I think we all hoped that they would come down. I think they're here forever at this rate. And then just simply not being able to get supply. We are in a mad dash to electrify our state, which is a great goal to have. But at the same time, there's a supply chain issue. The demand has been ramped up for solar and all those things, and EVs and EV charging stations, so you need higher voltage to be able to carry that across a multifamily project, and there's just not enough material. So we have projects that are sitting vacant right now because we can't light up our projects. And this is across the entire industry. So that leads to reduction in revenues, which hurts our bottom line, the same for developers, which may chase them to other states. So it's having a significant impact.
What about on the university's plans?
Certainly, cost of construction and materials are a big factor for us. We'll work with that design build partner, and one of the early conversations that we've already had in this next multi-year phase project is how can we acquire as much as we need now, right? Even if we have to buy a big transformer that we're not going to need to install until the end of the project, can we buy it now and warehouse it so that it is getting purchased at an affordable rate? Because again, every dollar we spend goes back into student rents, and so that's part of our commitment to keeping rents as affordable as possible.
I'll take this opportunity to share a bit of a bright side about the electrification piece, is that although there is this investment and this backlog that is crippling a lot of construction projects, in the long run, with the renewable energy and the batteries and greater efficiencies, which is what we want to do anyway and is increasingly required by code, is that utility costs are going to be coming down, and so the affordability overall will start to be helpful in just affordability, because sometimes those utility costs can be really crushing.
We actually have a couple questions from students about on-campus housing costing much more than off-campus housing. Also, students who cannot get the financial aid for student rent, but also can't afford private market rents in SLO, and perhaps having to live in their car. What are some implementations that will be done to prevent student homelessness at Cal Poly?
So there's a lot in that question. There are many questions.
There was two questions, I guess.
Okay, so we know that students can find things more affordable off campus than living on campus. Most of those places can often be some of those poor quality areas, converted garages that we know about that don't have some of the proper heating and ventilation and life safety systems, that students can take a single family house and sometimes put 5, 6, 7 people in there when it wasn't designed for that amount. So we benchmark and do so by CSU and state policy our rates and our facilities with like rates and like facilities off campus. I can't compare our continuing student apartments, which are 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartments, with a converted garage. I just can't compete with that, and we're not going to try to. And we don't want our students in those situations, because living on campus is better for them academically. We know students face homelessness, and we have a number of efforts underway on campus to make sure that when we know of a student who's homeless, we get them into housing right away. We're very fortunate to be one of the only campuses in California to have a philanthropic endowment for homelessness specifically, and so that endowment allows us to keep spaces available on campus. So if we encounter someone this afternoon who's sleeping in their car on campus, and we determine that they're homeless, we can put them in university housing tonight. Those funds also help us either reduce or subsidize the rent for students who live off campus, who may be somebody with a dependent or a family and can't, are at risk of being homeless because they can't make the rent. Financial aid is all based on a federal model. And so that money that we set aside from university housing allocation is given to our financial aid office, and it directly goes to students with the highest level of need who are living on campus. The university has other financial aid efforts and other state-based financial aid efforts that help defray the total cost of attendance for students living off campus.
So you have units on, or you have beds on campus for unhoused students, as well as rental assistance for students to live off campus?
Correct.
Got it. Okay. This is more of a city question. What are the barriers to building housing on the Cuesta College campus? Seems like there's plenty of room and it would help with their enrollment issues as well as housing pressure in the community.
Well, I'll start, and then maybe my colleagues will have more information. Cuesta is also not in the city; it's in the unincorporated county, and I think it's a great idea. I would love to see housing on the Cuesta campus. What I've heard is the barriers is because it's completely non-residential right now. It would just be a huge lift of then you need dining halls, you need you need a whole different level of public safety kinds of service, and maintenance, and all the things that a university provides that we don't even necessarily think about in terms of that. So I think it's a great idea. I think that that's kind of a statewide decision on whether that's allowable. But similar to Cal Poly, I think it could be financed. I think students would be interested in being able to have kind of the convenience and kind of the safety of good quality housing that's right on campus. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, I think you're right about the issue. There's no community there, so you don't have the infrastructure for people to thrive. They just live there but have to commute everywhere else to get their basic goods to live. But the state has changed rules that require cities, if they're going to sell surplus land, that they have to first try to negotiate in good faith with nonprofit developers like us to build affordable housing. In addition, the state created a room key program during the COVID-19 pandemic that converted dilapidated motels into immediate housing for homeless, because you couldn't have congregate situations because of the pandemic. And that converted into the home key program, which we've participated in a couple of our projects where we've taken old motels and turned them into permanent supportive housing. So there are ways to do this, and I think that's a cool idea long term.
This person wants to know if you would ever consider a Department of Off-Campus Housing for faculty and staff.
Not until this moment, a department, but I do think that the university our plans to develop additional housing on campus in this next phase, as well as continue on our available land. I think that we're committed to continuing to grow that. The university's Cal Poly Corporation leads those efforts for us. And so they may be our de facto department for faculty and staff housing, but I'm not sure if folks are wanting like icebreakers and mixers and RAs in a off-campus housing department.
No,
Some
I
of the
think
things
they're asking for help finding housing.
I know, I'm kidding. Yeah.
Right.
And I think the commitment is always to figure out how to keep those units affordable, right? There's our first complex, the university still owns the land, and the individuals own the facility, and so that helps to limit appreciation on there to keep those units affordable. Our corporation's also beginning to partner on a loan program for faculty and staff that they're getting ready to roll out that will help to offset the private mortgage insurance requirement that often can be a barrier to a new homeowner purchasing a home, especially because you have to have 20% down payment to avoid that private mortgage insurance, and 20% of a single family home or even a condominium in this community is quite a burden, and that can push that monthly cost high. So things like that are also underway to support faculty and staff.
Got a couple questions about subsidizing the construction of affordable housing. Can you please address the issue of state low-income tax credits and the difficulties in obtaining financing for affordable housing. There are many developers who must wait 2 to 3 years to qualify for the state funding. This is a bottleneck that prevents housing from being developed. So first of all, what is the low-income housing tax credit?
All right. Yeah, so there's, it's a federal law passed. I think this was along the tax reform in 1986, where essentially Congress and the President Reagan at that time said, we're not building public housing anymore. We're going to use the tax code to incentivize development by nonprofit or for-profit developers. And there was a major change from that point forward. So where we are today is there's about a $10 billion infusion nationwide for tax credits. We get $1 billion of that each year as the state of California. And so what it does is it basically allows hedge funds, banks, corporations, individuals a lot of money to reduce their tax liability and basically subsidize construction costs, and they be able to write off a major portion of their taxes each year, and we get to subsidize sometimes 20 to 30 or 40% of the construction costs. Unfortunately, as just noted in the question, somebody who's been paying attention, it takes 2 to 3 to 5, sometimes longer years to get through the list. We submitted last year, we submitted 3 projects and we got all 3 funded. We're very fortunate, but there were probably 40 to 50, maybe 100 projects on the list that weren't funded. So I talked to Jeannie about this. It's sort of like just to apply, you have to have a 4.0. This probably sounds familiar to some of the students in this room. So just don't even bother. If you have 4.0, okay, we'll consider you. But what else did you do? You know, are you serving veterans? Are you serving homeless? Are you serving folks with disabilities? You know, seniors? What are you doing that's going to go above and beyond that 4.0 just to get these extra credits? And so it's becoming more and more competitive, which is great. We're serving harder to serve populations, but then there's the ongoing costs because, as I mentioned earlier, we're bringing people in from the streets who have a lot of issues, and we have wraparound services, but it's maybe 1 staff to 30 or 1 staff to 60, and these folks have a lot of challenges to work through to become healthy and well. But it's a good program. It just needs to have 10 times the amount of funding to break through that log.
And even if you get approved for tax credits for one of your projects, I mean, you still have to layer on several additional funding sources, right?
That's right. We have our partner here, the city. They have a really robust inclusionary zoning policy, as you mentioned earlier. So if your market rate developer develops about 10%, they have to set aside either in their project or put into a pool for funding for folks like us. So we've used about $3 million in recent projects of the city's funds, oftentimes the county as well, to layer, and then the Housing Trust Fund is another partner. So usually we have 4 or 5 funding sources, and each one has a little different requirements in them that they'd like to see happen. So the regulatory compliance side of it is pretty astounding, but again, it's serving a good purpose, so we're happy to comply.
Yeah, and every single layer of funding that gets added, it comes with extra paperwork requirements. It drives up the cost of that unit. That's how we get to $500,000 per unit for affordable housing. And I think that's up to like $1 million a unit in some parts of the Bay Area now. It's pretty crazy. On that very cheery note, I think we've gone through all the questions, so thank you so much, everybody, for asking them. Thank you for being on the panel. I just really appreciate the engagement of the audience, and I think this was a great discussion. I hope you all learned something.
Jeannie, thanks. And thanks to all of you for being up here on the panel. Really helpful to do this, and it's a conversation every community needs to have. So very happy to be able to